Hi guys, this is Wabi Sabi by Unbottled Emotions, which literally translates to the idea of beauty in imperfections, which very well encapsulates the essence of our aim behind the podcast. We pursue to explore the various facets of mental health and social emotional learning and their interlinkage with various aspects of life. Dr. Itisha Nagar, our guest today, is a professor in the University of Delhi and specializes in the field of psychology. She was awarded the prestigious Junior Research Fellowship by the Government of India for pursuing her doctoral research in the area of high functioning autism. Her work has been featured in First Post, The Guardian, and Youth Ki Awaaz. She has published various papers in reputed journals for her research work in autism, depression, positive psychology, and gendered experiences like skin color bias, body image issues, and sexism. Dr. Nagar has been actively invited for numerous talks and lectures in different schools and colleges for her strong views and active involvement in spreading awareness about topics such as mental health, gender, and feminism. During the pandemic, she has been spending her time doing webinars and live sessions on a wide range of topics, ranging from domestic violence, mental health, relationships, Bollywood, and sexism. She is unabashedly a feminist and educationist, and our answer to what if all those beautiful Bollywood teachers in flowing saris were real?
Thank
Apt.
you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, so I think considering that Dr. Ritisha Nagar has been my professor as well, and we've had a lot of conversations about this in and outside of classroom, we thought that we'd pick up something that's very integral right now, and that's politically triggered anxiety. This is, of course, something ma'am will take up properly, much better than I can define, and in much easier words. But just to give a reason as to why we're doing this, I mean, right now it is, and this is a word that's thrown around like that's everywhere. We are living in uncertain times and we're living in extremely stressful times. And our identity, our place in the world, how safe or unsafe we feel has become immensely important. And because of that, it is inevitable that our mental health interacts with all of these facets. So this is something that Prakriti actually told me, that something called election stress disorder actually hit the global headlines in 2016 US presidential elections because, of course, Donald Trump. And funnily enough, this was something that was already discussed by a Jaipur based psychiatrist called Dr. Shiv Gautam back in the 1997, where he had studied the impact of local panchayat elections on the mental health of citizens. So it's really interesting that we've already done this, but we've forgotten about it entirely. And now everyone feels like they don't know what's happening with their stress levels and mental health levels. So I'll just now go to ma'am and ask her, for people who may not grasp very detailed lingo of psychology, what is politically triggered anxiety and why currently it's extremely important to talk about.
Well, just to begin with, politically triggered anxiety is not an official diagnosis per se. Having said that, what is happening is that the world has increasingly changed in the last, you can say, 10, 15 years. And a lot of things have happened, especially in the world of technology, in the world of politics, climate change, and all of that has greatly affected the mental health of all people. And the sad fact is, so many of us do not relate the personal to the political. And that's why we find it very hard to understand how what is happening in the exterior world can actually lead to issues like social isolation, depression, anxiety, stress. So, yeah, so if you want me to define politically triggered anxiety, then it's the anxiety that comes up from living in a world that is increasingly stressful and divided in terms of the political climate that we're living in. And these are some of the reactions that people are giving. In fact, I don't even think it's an abnormality because the world, that this is my personal opinion. I feel that if someone is normal in this world, I really, really envy them. Either they have to be too privileged or psychopaths. So, to begin with, if you are someone out there who is experiencing mental psychological distress, well, hey, you're normal because that's because the world around us is just too crazy. A famous psychiatrist said that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal. So yeah.
Hmm.
So I have a question here, which is, don't you think that when everything becomes this heated, we see that the debates get very easily heated,
Hmm?
especially on Twitter or Instagram, which is where most of the youth interacts. And that could actually act as a deterrent for many people to engage in such discussions, because a lot of people, for this very reason, claim ambivalence in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
So, how do we tackle that?
Firstly, I think I would love to say that here, let's talk about the post truth world that we're living in. There are some reasons why people are so fanatic about the kind of debates that they're having online. And one of these reasons is that both these set of groups of people, whichever camp they're coming from, they are very, very strongly convinced of their realities. In
Hmm.
fact, whether you talk about the left, whether you talk about the right, you talk about Democrats, you talk about Republican, people have not been so further apart in ages. There is literally very little common ground that people have, and that's probably because of the fact that all of us on social media are seeing different realities. We're living in our own bubbles where we're convinced that our reality is the truth. And from there, this is a classical study in psychology. If there is anonymity available, then a human being can get extremely cruel. A lot of your social norms that exist in the real world break down in an online world. These are some of the reasons why things get so extremely heated up. And when you talk about deterrent, I think I'll go one step ahead and say that these kind of heated conversations that at best probably are something that would be irksome, but at worst it could be trolling, it could be online harassment, it could really really affect you at a very deep level. It's not just a deterrent, it can definitely have long term mental health consequences for people who are engaging in it in an unhealthy manner.
We talked about how everyone's living in very different realities, but I see this stark contrast, and it's probably like maybe my bubble, but they're living in families or they're living in communities that are very starkly contrasting to what they see online and the kind of opinions they hold. So, this can definitely, and this has definitely caused altercations with loved ones, with probably their partners, even, or their friends. And just navigating those spaces, just living in that space, how does one do that without losing their mind?
I heard this speaker once, and he made a very interesting observation about the difference between millennials and Gen Z. And he said that as millennials, we actually had no idea of what we wanted to do. In fact, it's a very common thing for my generation कि हम लोग engineer पहले बनते थे और फिर सोचते थे कि life में क्या करना है. Where Gen Z is concerned, most of you've grown up in the internet era. So there's been a lot of information that has been available to you, and so many of you actually are very ill informed about so many issues that your parents have probably never even heard of. So you know what you want, but your problem is convincing your parents about where you're coming from, what your perspectives are. So things like your generation talking about homophobia, LGBT rights, transphobia, casteism, classism, you're talking about gender rights, you're talking about privileges, something that I don't think I actually even came to know till the time I was not a master's, at least a PhD student, very late in my life, in fact.
Hmm.
But the sad part is that people are actually finding, things that never really affected. कौन इतना सोचता था किसको वोट करना है? एक बार किसी को कर दिया,
Yeah.
दूसरी बार किसी को कर दिया. सारे एक जैसे ही थे हमारे लिए, for that matter. कभी मेरे को तो, I mean, I probably started voting way before you guys did. So yeah, hardly okay कौन MLA खड़ा हो रहा है, अच्छा ये चल रहा है, ये काम ठीक लग रहा है, कर देते हैं. It was never so personal about who you were voting.
Hmm.
And family conversations, nobody कोई बोल के नहीं भेजता था इसी पार्टी को वोट करना है. I mean, the other day I remember reading Delhi elections में someone locked his father inside because he was going to
Oh
Oh,
God.
for a particular party कि नहीं आप नहीं इनको वोट नहीं करेंगे, मैंने घर में बंद कर दिया उन्हें. Imagine that is happening and people are realizing. And then there was this another student of mine who had called up and asked that, okay, my boyfriend supports this political party and I've been trying to talk to him and I don't know what to do. Should I break up? Should I not break up? So she had all of these questions. I don't think I've faced this or I've seen this kind of you can say polarization in one way in families and in interpersonal spheres. ever before, at least, I mean, I'm not that old, but still, I haven't seen this. But culturally, we've never been taught to be confrontational. We've never been taught to talk about uncomfortable, discomforting topics. Politics kya, abuse kya, sexism kya. So we are more like brush it under the carpet, and because probably as a collectivistic culture, talking about things that could be problematic or discordial might lead to breakdown of a family. So in that way, sociologically speaking, it maybe makes sense. A lot goes into healthy communication between families. एंड अगर आपका पहले से ही कम्युनिकेशन हैज बीन प्रॉब्लमैटिक एंड उसके ऊपर से पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज आ जाते हैं तो इट कैन बिकम वेरी स्ट्रेसफुल फॉर बोथ पेरेंट एंड चाइल्ड लॉट्स ऑफ थिंग्स मे बी टेकिंग आउट time for where this is going to be no political talk time, and then taking out time that no, let us discuss politics, being respectful, maybe people keeping some ground rules that okay, if it's too triggering or if it starts going into a direction where either party or either person starts feeling very uncomfortable and unhealthy, that this discussion is becoming unhealthy, then taking
Mhm.
time off from it for some time and then coming back to it, talking about sources, encouraging healthy debating, like okay, you are telling me this, where, what is your source, you're
Mhm.
talking about this, maybe genuinely are trying to understand where the other person is coming from. आपको ऐसा क्यों लगता है? Why does this matter to you? Why does this value hold so much of regards to you? So in that way, healthy open communication, which is again something that will never come in one day, it is going to be something that you should probably be, something that needs to be practiced day in and day out, would be one of the things. And then of course you have to set your priorities in terms of what people in your family you even want to engage with. कोई दूर का मामा मौसा चाचा, जिसको शायद maybe there are other issues at place. Like as a woman,
Yeah.
if I talk about politics with someone दूर का family, I don't think he's interested in anything that I am saying. I think the only thing that is running through this male patriarch's mindset is ये कि लड़की इतना बोल क्यों रही है. तो सबके अपने अलग एजेंडा होते हैं, and deciding who are the people that you actually want to make an effort for, where to come to a common ground, whether that's your partner, whether that's your best friend, whether that's your parent, and then you'll have to kind of find your balance, see how, where and how, what happens and where it goes.
I think another thing that happened with the advent of internet was that earlier a lot of people absorbed the political ideologies of their parents. But now that
Mm.
we learned to navigate these spaces on our own, we developed very, opinions in very stark contrast, and that can lead to a lot of clashes at home, I suppose. So, yeah, discussing where you're coming from when you form a certain opinion is something that actually really, really helps, because your parents also see your perspective on why you say some things and why you believe in some values. Yeah, I
Right,
get it.
right.
So, my next question was in terms of this yet another pandemic that we're seeing, which is online trolling. Because the environment, as you said, is so intensely divided, it's
Mm.
very difficult for people to also keep an open mind when they do engage in these debates online. Because a lot of time they are, subject to harassment and trolling, and
Mm.
it takes a toll on their mental health. So, how do you suggest people deal with the stress that comes with online trolling and not let it deter them in any way?
Right. See, open mindedness, freedom of speech, dissent, debate, these are some very, very positive concepts. They don't work with bullies. And I agree with this quote that I have read once, that I may disagree with you, but I'm going to defend until death your right to say it. I may disagree with you. And that's, freedom of speech at its best. But if you are going to be trolling people, if you are going to be in guise of freedom of speech, if you're going to be abusive, if you're going to give rape threats, if you're going to give murder threats to people, I think you need to be blocked. I don't think your freedom of speech goes till there. That is bullying, and that needs to be called out. I was speaking on some other platform about online, especially where women are concerned. Internet has been a very empowering space for many women, and this is something Ravish Kumar had said once in a speech, that जैसे कि बहुत सारे ऐसे examples हैं where backward marginalized community, young girls especially, they're coming up and they're expressing themselves, they have a voice. And this is what men especially And people in general who are not used to women being assertive, who are not used to women having a voice, they're used to women being spoken for. And that's very different for them to see. And therefore, they suppress. They might morph your photographs, they might body shame you, they might troll you really badly on gender and caste and all those kind of lines. So, how do you deal with that? I think that you need to really understand the difference between when a debate is debate and when it's getting into trolling, whether you're doing it or whether it's being done to you, and call it out. Do not engage with bullies, do not engage with online trolls, because they are not there to learn, they're not there to understand, and there is nothing that is going to come out of engaging with them. There are smarter and more creative ways to get back, perhaps. Like, for instance, many people have started reporting the trolls to the places that they work, the schools and colleges that they might be at, and there have been. So that means that some check is there, or maybe you want to take the legal recourse. So that's one of the ways. But coming to, let's say, other places, then it's completely up to you. I mean, I think there's so much of pressure that people feel that I must debate, that I must have the last word, that I must prove my point, that it can come at the cost of your mental health. So there is so much of emotional labor that really goes into explaining someone something. And honestly, I don't do it for free. So if you're gonna, if educate, for me as a teacher, I get paid for this stuff. I don't do it for free. So I remember a lot of people who try to troll me, and I'm like, okay, you gotta come to my class, because your intellectual evolution, your learning, your becoming a better human being is not something that I live for. It's not something that is my responsibility. So, yeah, I genuinely worked on not feeling the pressure to have the last word. It's okay. And I don't need to engage with everyone on every topic. There are boundaries that I need to draw for, which are going to be coming from healthy self care space. And not just getting drawn into the conversations that are going to be extremely toxic and unhealthy. So, calling out, getting out of, taking a break from any toxic situation in your life is a good idea, according to me.
So, when we go to law school, the first thing that we learn, like in our very first semester, is this thing called logical fallacies. And
Hmm.
basically, it's this whole thing where they teach you these are some fallacies that you can have in your logic. That's when you know you are not debating, you are speaking trash, essentially. And to all the listeners out there, I would recommend you to look some of them up, especially because Strawman is something that we get involved in a lot. The whataboutism that we engage
Hmm.
in, which leads to diversion from topic. And also, I think one thing that you said was really right, and I would like to like summarize it this way: is that there are some minds that you really can't change over 240 character dialogues, and I think it's okay if you make your peace with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of us find ourselves drained in the, at least in the initial days. We were so, I would say, like, generally the whole idea was that, and it still is, I guess, to some extent, that we're going to give our all into whether it's activism online or activism offline, to the point that a lot of people, they just didn't see anything come out of it. They only found themselves deteriorating or their health deteriorating. And something very important that you mentioned was your self-care, or like your boundary. So I mean, if someone's actually going through that kind of distress, what are things that they can look out for that sort of not diagnoses them, but like sort of legitimizes the feelings that they're feeling, rather than them thinking, oh, मैं ज्यादा ही फील कर रही हूँ, या फिर मैं कुछ ज्यादा ही इमोशनल हो रही हूँ इस बारे में. So I mean, are there any signs that they should look out for, or are there times when they should just stop when it comes to this?
I think there are plenty out there, but probably not looking for them. That's why there's so many things out there. So, emotional burnout, for instance, इतनी information, इतने सारे tabs खुले हैं दिमाग में, कहीं कुछ हो गया. Every day, like for instance, right now I'm getting up with one horrific rape news after the other. But if you realize that you've started becoming desensitized to these news, you are not able to emotionally feel. If you're experiencing emotional numbness, that would probably be a sign for concern for me, that something is going wrong. Second is inability to think, a lot of confusion and not being able to decide, not being able to who's right, who's not right, feeling confused, feeling or maybe just feeling tired or feeling like, wow, I can't do simple things, and feeling you're very cognitively strained, especially when it comes to, certain political topics or certain kind of topics. So that again, emotional and mental burnout would be one of the things. Then of course, if there are the other, you can say, classic things would be inability to sleep. What There are people who get up in the middle of the night to check their Instagram, किसने comment किया,
Yeah,
कितने likes आ गए, उसने उसके बाद क्या लिखा, because people also, they associate their self esteem with being publicly called off, or being,
definitely.
exactly, being publicly told that you're wrong. Very few of them actually see it as a learning experience. Thank you for correcting me, I've learned something today. Most of us are looking to win, and
Yeah.
that's affecting our sleep cycle. Some In an extreme case, you may feel like you can't sleep. You're probably online all the time, you're addicted to your phone. Every 5 minutes you're checking your social media. You And of course, your routine has gone for a toss, in the sense you feel a lot of anxiety, ghabrahat hona, feeling like the phone or the laptop is controlling you rather than you controlling it. So these are some very possible signs of concern for me.
So, I mean, now talking about actually practicing it. So, when it gets a little extreme, like I've spoken about it in therapy, and I actually read a status by someone like a few months ago, I think, when all of this, when everything started, basically, that I think this XYZ government should pay for all of our therapies because that's what's taking us to. And
Right.
it's true, though. I think a lot of people did start, and especially during this pandemic as well. So, I mean, if we were to go to a therapist and sort of have this kind of, and the therapy has had this principle of neutrality, of not
Mm.
your own political leaning or social political leaning. However, I don't think that's always followed. Kahin na kahin body language and all mein it shows. But how does a therapist, or maybe you even as a professor, how do you stop the other, like if the other person's opinion or your student or your client's opinion differ from yours, how do you tackle it, or how do you just maintain that kind of no unbiased stance?
Well, as a teacher, I'm in position of power, so so my word is the last word. Jokes apart, well, talking about therapists first, I think neutral therapist is a great myth, and we've been
Yeah.
nurturing that myth for the longest time. Probably because, as a discipline, we've been wanting to be science and as close to
Mhm.
science as possible since so long. And for us, जैसे आपने मुन्ना भाई MBBS में देखा होगा, the Boman Irani's perspective on how medicine should be, that you should be objective and not attached to your patients, and you're there to just treat them and cure them, and there needs to be no belief, ideology, love, affection, care doesn't come in between. That's the same thing that, as therapists, that we try to follow, that I'm going to be this neutral person. I'm not going to have my opinion on political opinion, religious opinion, moral convictions. That's not the case. Actual goal of being a therapist should be is the awareness of it, so that you're not blindsided by your own beliefs. That's very, very important. So if, let's say, I'm aware that I will find it very difficult to work with someone who's a rapist, so I will not be
Mm.
taking up these cases. I will refer them to people who may be more comfortable in working with a certain section or certain group of people. Being aware of my personal theoretical ideological basis and how it might affect my professional functioning is what we were actually looking for, rather than a mechanistic person sitting in front of you. Also, I think over a period of time, the discipline has also evolved. I'm sorry, I may be getting a little theoretical here, but I think it's very
Mhm.
important to understand how mental health, हम अभी भी बहुत लोग सोचते हैं कि सिर्फ एक इंडिविजुअलिस्टिक है, कि मतलब आपकी हार्मोन न्यूरोट्रांसमीटर कुछ केमिकल लोचा जिसे बोलते हैं, अगेन मुन्ना भाई
Yeah,
समवन,
yeah.
केमिकल लोचा आपके दिमाग में हो गया है, दवाई ले लो और किसी से बात कर लो. नाउ दैट देव इवन स्टार्टेड में ओपनिंग अप टू काउंसलिंग, उनको लगता है कि भाई बात कर लो और फैमिली से कर लो, नहीं तो किसी काउंसलर के पास चले जाओ. एटलीस्ट दिल्ली एंड अर्बन सिटीज में दे स्टिल बिकम लिटिल ओपन, एंड दैट्स इट. We do not connect mental health to family dynamics. We do not
Yeah.
connect mental health to interpersonal relationships. We can do, and certainly we do not connect it to the political atmosphere, the cultural atmosphere. For instance, so many of us therapists, psychologists, people in general, when we see mental health, we see the individual को fix कर दो कुछ कुछ कर
Mm.
आके. कि problem individual में नहीं है. Individual is a manifestation of the toxic circumstances that we might be living in now. Many therapists thankfully have realized that this neutral therapist approach is not something that's working. We are increasingly moving towards helping our patients or clients, actually would be the better word here, because we've not been trained to talk about politics. Now we're increasingly realizing that we cannot, especially under the given circumstances, politics ko bahar karke, it's going to be so incomplete. Of course, we are not telling our clients कि किसको वोट करना है आपको जाके. Neither am I doing that as a teacher कि आप इसको वोट करो या आप उसको वोट करो. We are not making political activists out of people. We are just helping understand that what they're going through is not just chemical locha. That's one perspective to it, but it is tied to an LGBT person belonging to the community, not being accepted by the family, not having any friends while growing up, bullied incessantly. I want to tie it up to, I want this person to understand that it's not you. It's the structures that we have in our society. Similarly, recently I started talking about how a lot of abuse that happens with young girls in the guise of uniform checking. किस तरह की लड़कियों क्या पहन रखा है, कहाँ तुम्हारे family members ने तुम्हें कुछ नहीं सिखाया, लड़कों को आकर्षित करना चाहती हो तुम. So these are some of the things that have greatly affected the mental health of women, and most of us have grown up to internalizing the shame जो बचपन से हमें घर में, schools में, हर जगह अपनी body के बारे में बताया जाता है कि नहीं तुम्हारी body गलती है. Be ashamed of your body, your breasts, your anything. Don't, almost like do not exist. That is the message that is being given, because otherwise you will get raped. How can I not talk about these things, or how can I not explore these things with the client when these are some of the very very pertinent aspects of this person's life? Not just personal change over here, that we don't just make this person an agent of personal change, but also in the process social transformation, how we're tying personal well-being to now social well-being. So, and that's exactly what I do in my classes, not therapy, of course, but I talk about these things. I discuss these things. I talk about gender, especially gender. I talk about caste, because again, in a government college, I can't even tell you how openly students and sometimes even teachers may engage in anti-caste comments like reservation वाले तो ऐसे होते हैं, reservation वाले तो वैसे होते
all
हैं.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are legit debates के नाम पे casteist lines पे बातें चलती हैं,
हाँ.
which is not okay at all. So yeah, while I'm okay with someone talking about the pros and cons of reservation, but there is a certain way of speaking about it. You can't be blatantly casteist. And I have seen this marginalized kids from backward communities who belong to certain castes. They may not be able to voice because there's so many of them, so they will not, they'll be very quiet. I won't, sometimes I won't speak them, actually 9 out of 10 times I won't. So it's my role as a teacher to bring in those points where I can make them think of other things that they have not heard ever before. I think therapy in that way and maybe teaching in that way, they connect over change
Yeah,
as a process.
definitely. I think that that is extremely important. I feel like a lot of people, and this is also in reference to your the whole skirt thing and the uniform thing that happened. I don't think a lot of girls would honestly talk about that in therapy, but they would talk about that with a teacher who gave them a safe space. Because you are in that environment, if that's the environment that's distressing you, but in that same environment, you have this person who can give you that kind of space to voice your opinion. I think that's also, I won't say equally or in a comparative or whatever, but independently, I think that's very, very cathartic. So
Absolutely. And even when we talk about therapy, Devyani, how many, मतलब हम तो बहुत ही
हाँ,
privileged बात कर रहे
जी.
हैं. कितने लोग, कितनी लड़कियां थेरेपी अफोर्ड कर पा रही, कितनी लड़कियां थेरेपी जा पा रही. आई थिंक वी बीइंग वेरी प्रिविलेज्ड इन दैट वे, एंड दैट्स व्हाई having a kind person, especially a kind elder person, a teacher especially, could play a very important role in. I think I had so many young girls messaging me that we never saw it that way. And they thanked me. I had kids coming up and saying, I can't stop crying, thinking about all of those things. And thank you, because I had been blaming myself for all of these incidents. So I didn't do anything. I didn't reach out to them personally. It's just something that I shared, which reverberated with them. So I think the kindness of one person can really, really do a lot, because therapy is not the answer for everyone, affordability,
Yeah,
accessibility wise.
definitely. And I think we're talking about how our very legitimate stresses, our very legitimate growing years during which they do all of this damage and gaslighting and whatnot,
Right. Right,
are
right.
turned into simple
Absolutely.
statements. Yeah.
Absolutely. People are like, आपने जाके complain क्यों नहीं करी? आपने जाके बोला क्यों नहीं? अरे, we have 40-year-old, 50-year-old women who are afraid to talk about things. They're afraid to come up, and you're expecting 10-year-old girls to one, firstly realize that this is wrong, and secondly be empowered enough to go against the principal, to go against the teachers, to talk about. And most of the times the parents are in it also, because it is a patriarchal culture. So schools are miniature societies, and that's just impossible. I have when I wrote the post, I had young kids, probably 17, 16-year-old, some boys especially, who came up and started trolling me कि आपको this is not abuse and आप क्या समझ रहे हैं and आपको नहीं पता है and something, and
I
it
read
even
those comments. Yeah.
got nasty. And I'm like, one, you're mansplaining, and you're also child-splaining, and I'm a psychologist,
Yeah.
I'm a professor. Are you gonna tell me what? Are you gonna mansplain and child-splain abuse to me now? So I found it quite ridiculous and funny actually, that how confident people are in infantilizing and denying. So बच्चों को तो infantilizing में I can understand क्योंकि वो बच्चे हैं. A 30-year-old professor, woman psychologist, you are saying कि अरे नहीं आपको नहीं पता है. I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah, that's actually really true. So I came from a really conservative Catholic girls' school. So I had all of these experiences and just so many more. And oh, it's a fun thing that I think a lot of you might have heard of. So whenever we had sports day, they would tell us to wear clothes, like undergarments of one size smaller, so that we
Mhm.
wouldn't be too lewd in their terms, which made no sense to me. And
Absolutely. Like I actually had a guy who very naively had commented, "Why are they making the girls wear tighter bras? Isn't that supposed to be more exciting?"
Oh God.
And I was like, okay. Apart from and he didn't speak from a very vulgar point of view. He was actually very
Yeah.
curious. कि हो क्या रहा है ये?
he was just very genuinely concerned. Please explain to me.
Like maybe he was like, maybe it's just me, or am I the odd one out? So
But
yeah.
yeah, a lot of times this reality doesn't register with people who haven't gone through it. And I think
Yeah.
that dissonance that comes with it, and yet the confidence that you have, even though you don't realize what's going on, it's my favorite thing in the
Absolutely.
world at some point.
If anyone's interested, and this is not at all a promotional thing or something, but I on my Instagram page, which is Professor Drape, there are at least 500 women who've documented, who've sent me, and this is just the tip of the iceberg what we've discussed. And probably lots, maybe people who are listening like, अरे नहीं, ये तो discipline होता है और लड़कों के साथ भी होता है. You know, we've been there, done that. We've gone through all of those arguments. So just to
Yeah.
summarize, I would really, if someone's interested, please go read. And this is just tip of the iceberg. There are 500 women, and I still had people coming in and writing to me. It just got to my mental health that I had to stop.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yes.
stopping after 500, but I had to, because I was at least online for 4 days, constantly checking those messages, putting the screenshots out there. And yeah, well, I plan to do more about it, of course, it forward, maybe with workshops in schools and colleges, maybe writing articles, videos about it. Because yeah, this is they're not listening to young girls, of course, but they probably may just listen to a professor and a psychologist because of the position of power that I am in right now. Might as well use it.
So I have a follow-up question with what you just discussed, and that is a lot of people nowadays feel guilt if they feel like they're not involved enough. And then how do we deal with that? How do we manage, being overwhelmed with the guilt that comes with not being involved enough?
I think that's again very pertinent question. We have a devil and a deep sea choice where if we don't switch off, we feel overwhelming sense of politically triggered anxiety. Or if we switch off, we tend to start feeling guilty. We tend to start feeling I'm not doing enough. We tend to feel absolute self-loathing for ourselves. What are you doing? Why people are out there and ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai, or then you start self-doubting, and are you privileged enough, and what are you doing? So सबसे पहली बात तो ये है, I think we really need to understand that while problems have always existed, it's not just कि 15-20 साल में आपको कुछ प्रॉब्लम ज़्यादा हो गई हैं, racism, Islamophobia and marginalization ज़्यादा हो गई है. I think problems have always existed in the history of mankind. It's just that with social media, with internet era, with this information age, never have human beings been bombarded with so many things. It's very, like my sister was saying the other, that Instagram used to be my safe space to go watch memes,
Yeah.
have fun, laugh at things, silly videos. But now it's gotten just so, again, started becoming very toxic in terms of, by toxic, I mean, there is just so many causes out there which is becoming overwhelming and therefore toxic probably for an individual, or let me use a milder word, triggering. क्या क्या cause, कितने कितने causes, मतलब मैं क्या क्या करूं? I mean, women's rights, LGBT rights, Islamophobia, casteism, you have animal rights, you have climate change. कुछ ना कुछ तो रह ही जाएगा, कितना कुछ मैं and I want to do something at the end of the day, of course. Probably that leaves us with a very paralyzing sense of guilt and not being good enough. So probably what needs to be done is acknowledge the limits of your mind. We are not meant to be processing this kind of information. It's okay to switch off tabs in your mind and probably learn the art of now refocusing in a digital world. We are just so scattered, not focused at all, and that leaves us feeling very empty, very guilty about not doing, because at the end of the day we want to make some change. Then of course some of us are actually, I feel personality disposition wise, probably some of us are more vulnerable, especially the ones that I would say have a toxic sense of morality. And by that, नहीं सही नहीं हो रहा है, गलत हो रहा है, finding it very difficult to understand complexities of the world, inability to see grays, heightened sense of personal responsibility कि अरे ये तो बहुत गलत है, मुझे कुछ करना चाहिए, I need to do more, I need to save people, I need to be out there, I need to be doing. So, and we tend to then probably also, there is a lot of social comparison that happens, that okay, we all can't, no, not everyone can be a Malala Yousafzai or Greta Thunberg, or maybe even closer home 9-year-old, even Lissy Priya, Kangujam. So if you, I'm sorry, I may have pronounced her name incorrectly, but a 9-year-old kid who's getting recognized for and recognition is probably not what a lot of us are looking for, but yeah, she's getting extremely recognized for the work that she's doing, which is in the area of climate change. It can make any 30-40-year-old person think कि मैंने क्या किया अपनी जिंदगी में. So the social comparisons also become so, because again information इतनी आ रही है तो आपको लग रहा है अरे वो ये कर रहा है, वो ये कर रही है, वो ये कर रही है. So it's not just that we're comparing our looks with another person or the cars that we have with another person. Many of us are also looking at how much the other person is doing. Probably I can maybe only imagine that many Bollywood actors would actually be feeling a lot of FOMO seeing this guy do so much work. What's his name? I
Sonu
forgot.
Sood.
Sonu Sood, yeah. It's the same thing probably happening with us. So maybe this understanding where our sense of, like I said, unhealthy morality, sense of morality is coming from, that is becoming maybe destructive for our own selves or unhealthy for our own selves. It's also a long-term work. So for me to just suggest कि ये कर लो और ये try कर लो, वो नहीं आने वाला. It's something that would probably need a lot of work. And also understanding you can't pour from an empty cup. If you are emotionally numbed out, if you're in a burnout state, क्या करोगे, किसके लिए करोगे? मतलब switching off is an act of self care. It's not selfish, and that is something that we really need to understand. And like, I mean, I think I'll just end this answer with what Charles Bukowski said, that you start with saving one person at a time. Everything else is grandiose romanticism or politics. Maybe sometimes that one person is you that you need to save first and foremost. No, actually, not sometimes, most of the times it's you. So if you feel empty, then maybe, you really need to find ways to work around that guilt.
So there are studies that say that politically triggered anxiety might dissuade people from voting. And that is a big concern that we haven't yet seen, because again, we saw a rise of voter turnouts in the recent elections. But now that again, because situations keep getting more and more divided, I think that's a very genuine concern to have. So how do you think we can encourage people to engage at least to the extent of where they vote with an informed choice, and
Mm.
instead of letting this dissuade them.
Mm.
Interesting, interesting. So, I haven't read this research, but um, from what I understand is that I somewhere feel that a lot of this online trolling and IT cell work, and you have one news coming one day, अगले दिन पूरी उल्टी कोई news आ गई है, publish हो गई है, कुछ ना कुछ. The, you know, it's very chaotic, it's very confusing, and sometimes it feels like I'm living in some dystopian reality or some psychopath's brain where, you know, mass level की gaslighting चल रही है एकदम
Mm.
अलग लेवल की gaslighting चल रही है कि मैं खुद कंफ्यूज हो जाती हूँ. एंड मे बी दैट इज द पर्पस ना, chaos क्रिएट करने का probably पर्पस ही ये है that people should become passive, people should become robotic, people should stop thinking, their capacity to think, feel, because we don't want thinking people, we don't want feeling people, we want robots and followers sometimes. For especially with the rise of authoritarian regimes that we have across democracies. So in that way, I don't know how many people are actually concerned about the voters turnout. So at least the people who deeply value democracy, who deeply value, you know, citizen participation and empowerment of citizens through something as basic as voting, I think first and foremost probably this realization that yeah, we understand that it's very like हम लोग you know बहुत लोग politics है, शायद यही reason है हम कि we don't have good people in politics, it's too dirty, it's too dirty. And maybe that's that whole thing about I want to keep, मेरे को तो politics कुछ मतलब नहीं है, बहुत लोगों का attitude होता है that अरे
Yeah.
politics doesn't affect me, मुझे politics से क्या मतलब है. तो that was already there, we were already dealing with that problem of how to get people to vote. Now an added thing is कि यार घर में लड़ाई नहीं, so you see lots of mothers who've stopped making their children and their father at least talk about politics in on dinner table कि नहीं कोई बात नहीं करेगा, because again I'm not being sexist here, but women do have that, you know, relationship maintain करने वाला role
Yes,
society
yes.
का. So yeah,
It happened last night at my place. I agree with everything that you just said. And
I think मेरा शायद थोड़ा philosophical आंसर शायद ये भी रहेगा, मे बी विस्टफुल आंसर ये रहेगा, मे बी when we reach rock bottom as a society and every day feels like we are, I think we'll start caring again. I think we'll start. I have this belief in humanity that we'll rise. I think because जितना you know oppression होता है उतना resistance भी आता है. So I do have
Mm.
this belief that democracy should not go away that easily, and we'll have people coming and voting for the right kind of people, the ones that they feel will help make the world a better place for their children.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you for a message of hope at the end, but you've already given it. So thank you for that. I think a lot of us are disillusioned and sort of just swaying here. We're just distilled in, dispersed in the presence that कुछ भी हो रहा है, हम बस ऐसे ही घूम रहे हैं.
Mm.
I think all of us just need that kind of reminder every now and then. So I think this is where we're going to close now. Thank you so much for your time, ma'am. And I think, again, like always, I learned a lot. We discussed a wide array of things without leaning in any one way. So I hope that people from different beliefs, from whichever side they're on, whichever political belief that they have, took something from this, because I think it's definitely a distressing time for all. It's definitely a time where our choices matter. So thank you again. I'm sure a lot of people took away, will take away when they listen to this a lot from this, and search Professor Drape and go to that post and read those important things. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prakriti. Thank you so much, Devyani.
thank you so much, ma'am. It was an absolute pleasure to have you.